Yeah, let's bring in our Taking Stock panel tonight and kick it off with that topic. Greg Baxter is one of Australia's leading communication experts specialising in crisis management, and Angela Vathulkas is founder of the Small Business Party. So, Angela, I might start with you. What do you think? Should the Newstart allowance be lifted? Does he make a good point?
Look, this is a touchy subject for a lot of people. There are about 770,000 people that could be affected if this Newstart allowance is increased in some way, and including, I think, a little bit more for rental allowance. I'd like to see more money put into job training. I think that the whole purpose of Newstart, it is to provide a little bit of a cushion and a safety net if you lose your job. It's not meant to be a long-term solution, and we've got a huge problem with our budget in Australia, and a lot of that is about all our social money that's going out. So more money into job training, get these people more work so that they can either retrain if they've been retrenched or having trouble getting into the workforce, or with single mums getting in and out with childcare, etc. More money in training means that we've got better productivity and less reliance on social security.
Okay.
More money on training.
Not necessarily increasing Newstart then. Yeah.
No. Yep. No, not my first option.
Yep. Greg?
I couldn't disagree more, to be honest. I think the level of Newstart is a disgrace. It hasn't grown for about 20 years, over 20 years, in real terms.
Yep.
It's essentially below the poverty line. You cannot live on that in any reasonable way. So the idea of, in Angela's scenario, somebody wanting to go and get training, you know, they've got to get to the place where the training's being offered, which means they're going to have public transport costs or other transport costs. It is just way too low for. It's not an amount that you can live on at all. And I think that sure we need training and sure we need a lot of attention on productivity, but it's a tiny part of the social services budget. It's only about 7% of the total social services budget. And it hasn't changed for so long when everything else has been inflated over that time. I just can't see any reason, any justification for not increasing it quite markedly.
And I mean, peak business groups have been pretty clear for many years, I think, really saying that, you know, you rarely find peak business groups agreeing with the welfare groups on issues. I mean, let's be honest. And they've been both saying, you know, I think the BCA is on record for 6 years saying it needs to be increased because they actually see it as a barrier to employment. It is so low, it becomes a barrier. I think that they become so far out of, you know, society and so far below the poverty line. There
are other ways of encouraging and increasing that benefit, and not having that as a net better payment, which it does to some degree discourage people from seeking better employment.
I honestly cannot see how it discourages people from seeking employment when it is so low. I think that if you were on Newstart, you would desperately want to get some kind of employment, because
I'm glad I'm not. And I understand that there is that issue, and with the way the cost of living is, it is very difficult. However, it is more people are draining the economy of more money, and there are fewer of us being able to support it, and it's not sustainable. So the goal is to make sure that we don't need as much of that safety net for people who are out of work. We need to be looking at how we can get them back into the workforce as opposed to being reliant on that. We need a safety net. Increasing it for short term, yes, but I mean, pensioners deserve an increase. Much more of a priority than the Newstart allowance. I mean, these people have paid taxes all their lives and they're living on the poverty line as well. And I'm not far from that, so.
Well, I don't have a problem with pensioners getting more money either, but I think they're both priorities. But I do think that if we look at the checks and balances within the sort of fiscal management of the country, this just seems to me such an obvious area that needs reform, and reform quickly. I mean, even John Howard, who was an advocate of freezing it for a while, came out this year and said, it's time to lift it.
Yeah, he was the architect of the Work for the Dole scheme, and even he said, let's increase it. It is at a time when there was an interesting discussion this week about needing to refocus back on small business too, because we can see the pain there. You've talked about job training. I guess this comes into play here as well. You alerted us to some pretty interesting figures, Angela, about roughly 55,000 small businesses going bust in the 2017-18 year got about 2 million small businesses in Australia, but in retail, which gels with what we've been talking about, Chris, on a bigger picture level, retail is in a lot of pain at the moment.
Yeah. It's a bit of a shock to see the numbers. 1,000 operators were surveyed and found that they were in fear of their businesses closing somewhere between 3 to 5 years moving forward. The stats are, I think, a 13% increase on business closure of last year. So it's increasing at a much faster rate than it ever has. It used to just be a small paragraph and a discussion of, you know, businesses, some of them expect to close within the first 5 years of starting up, but now it is almost those that are established are also in fear of losing. And retail has been so disrupted, particularly because of the online situation, and their old models don't work anymore. Bricks and mortar hasn't caught up with it. So the rents and the overheads of having a physical retail store are so intense as opposed to anything online, that those two haven't caught up. So something needs to come down in order to level the playing field. But retailers are feeling the pinch more than they ever have.
So do you think that they're right when they say that we're worried that we're going to be out of business within a couple of years? Do you think that that is the outcome that we're heading for in Australia, or do you think that something's going to change?
No, the current climate, because we are essentially, the economy in retail is a bit clunky. So it will be so slow to catch up that there will be a lot more of a loss. Small business will take the hit even more. And once you've got small business going out, you've got people losing their jobs. Of course, you've got defaults on mortgages. Everything else comes into play. It's a cycle that is quite horrible, particularly when we are such a big small business community in Australia with so many millions of us. And yes, we really need to be able to, in fact, be more fluid as small business, retrain, regroup, have better tools available for us, learn different skills. So many of us as small business operators don't have those new skills moving forward. You know, it used to be about common sense and hard work. Now we need to be training in, you know, the world of meta, being able to run our own online businesses as well as our physical retail presence, and of course being able to bring in new people into the businesses.
Greg, you'd be advising retail clients in your years, I imagine.
Well, not
the big end of town, not small business.
Not small business.
I mean, some of the issues are really roughly the same in terms of that, where we're at.
You've got to look at Myers and DJs.
This won't make me popular, but I think if you travel a lot, you see a big difference between small business, particularly retail businesses in Australia and elsewhere. I mean, I was at the Opera House last night, and I left the Opera House at 10 o'clock. As all of the theatres were emptying out, so there were, you know, a couple of thousand people heading towards taxis. There were none. But then possibly could have had a drink or something after the show. And I took a picture and put it on Instagram of these empty, not just empty restaurants, but restaurants who'd already packed up the tables and chairs for the night. And I just thought, what are you doing? You know, this is a global city, for heaven's sake. 10 o'clock at night. Something not quite. No, that's a very bad picture. So I think
But that's not that's not their regulation. That's compliance that's stopping them.
Well,
which goes to your point.
That's certainly. I mean, compliance, particularly around food and liquor, is ridiculous, particularly in New South Wales.
But also, our wages are so high. Try and put staff on at 10 p.m. at night on a small business.
You're paying a dishwasher.
Well, no, I was going to say you have to be the owner and wanting to stay in your business at that time of night.
Well, I think those. I appreciate the small business argument about wages and labour costs generally, but I guess a little similar to the Newstart discussion. If you're earning those wages, they don't feel high at all. In fact, the minimum wage in Australia, I think, is also, you know, largely below the poverty line for about half the people that are on it. And so there is, as Angela says, there's a whole dysfunction or a disconnect here in terms of small business retail not really yet catching up with where it needs to be in the
and held back by compliance, bureaucracy, all the red tape and the taxes that go into it that keep those overheads up high, where we can't pay better wages, we can't stay open longer, we can't diversify and change to a more sustainable model.
What we find is that a lot of the metrics around the Australian economy are looking pretty good at the moment in a lot of ways, and then we talk about small business and it's all falling to pieces. We saw the biggest challenges, rising rising energy bills, increasing overheads, payroll costs, struggle to secure finance. It's obviously on the rise recently. So, I mean, none of those are particularly new themes. Angela nodding away over here. And the access to finance is a big one. So
they're not new, but they are worse than ever. It's always been tough to get finance, but it is almost impossible now.
And getting worse?
It's getting worse all the time. Banks are constantly turning their backs on small business. They say they want to be about small business. There are even departments called small business banking, and they very rarely assist in the credit and financing of them. I mean, they ask more from small business for credit than they do of big business. It seems to be easier to
I'm laughing because I've been through it all, and the business manager says, oh, it's with credit, and then it goes silent for months.
That's right.
And
that's why second-tier banks are doing better.
Yes.
That's right. But payroll is up. Energy costs, you know, they're up 40% for some businesses. You don't just find that extra money in sales or profits. It's usually coming out of a whole other pool of funds.
Unless you can jump on Halloween and that bandwagon that we now love as retailers in Australia. Is that what Halloween is? Is this just
we have a
filling
big
the promotional void?
We have a big difference of opinion here. Yes.
Greg, you go first.
Bar humbug over there.
Retailers filling the promotional void just to make it to Christmas, or a great tradition that we love in Australia.
If it buoys sales, fantastic.
He's all
fantastic.
For it. But don't knock on his door.
I hear a butt.
Don't knock on his door. He's got no lollies at home.
It was interesting, the discussion about access to credit. I mean, if you look at a lot of the studies about why small businesses fail, you know, a huge factor is that it was a bad idea. Another huge factor is they didn't have a strategy, you know, and then that's even before you get to the problem with cash flow.
Yeah.
And so, to be brutally honest, I think some of these businesses should never have been lent any money to start, because they were clearly not going to succeed.
Like a lot of property investors.
And the banking sector, I think, has very generously, you know, lent money hand over fist when it suited them, probably not as responsibly as it should have. And now, of course, we're seeing that pull back a lot around responsible lending, but a whole range of other factors that are going on in the economy and in the regulatory environment.
Is there a Halloween bank account?
Well, let's hope so.
Well, it's scary stuff out there.
The kids enjoy Halloween. It's great for some of those small business suppliers. It seems to make people happy in the lead up to Christmas. It's religion neutral, so everyone can participate without offending anyone. The kids go to so much time and effort. I know that's all the parents, and you know, there's a parent tax. They can keep 10% of everything that's collected.
Oh,
Did you know that?
Sure, yeah,
I like that.
You know that? And there should be a 10% auntie tax. If you take them to the school fete on the weekend and sit in those stupid
I do
kid
still
rides.
find it a little strange, though, Halloween. Like, I'm on board now.
Why?
Well, because now I've got a kid and they all get to dress up and they look so damn cute. I said it last night, and how can you deny them? Actually, I just had a report from home that my kid was standing at the gate and loved giving out lollies and actually didn't even ask to eat any. So he hasn't even worked that bit out yet.
Nice.
That's next year. We'll work that bit out. No, but I think it's funny because Australians have typically like being very, I don't know, dignified and quiet around their homes, and all this silliness in the neighbourhood. I think we've taken a long time to get used to.
It's a community event. In America, it used to get all the local communities together, and you know, here we weren't that into it in suburban Australia, but now it is. It's really joining the communities. The kids get out on the streets. I mean, they've got to be supervised, and there's a few issues with, you know, allergies and sugar, which I'm
I'm
discovering all these things.
That's for next week's show.
But it does look there's nothing cuter than a 3-month-old in a skeleton onesie, you know. So
I can think of a few things.
Welcome to names.
Greg, you're quiet over there. So are you very much anti-Halloween?
Well, I'm not anti. Someone said to me earlier they think it's great because people get excited about it, and excitement in that way is a good, you know,
it's good for the psyche.
Harmless thing.
Yeah.
Sure.
So on that basis, I'd have to be broadly a supporter, but I'm not going home to hand out or receive lollies.
Don't go to Greg's place.
Yeah, we're not full throttle yet, are we?
Nothing happens in my place.
Yeah.
In regards to Halloween.
There's no knocking on ringing the bell at my place. They
Don't
know,
go to Uncle
they know
Greg.
the guy on the corner doesn't do anything on Halloween.
I mean, one of the problems is it's spring here, right? And it's like bright daylight at 5 in the afternoon. It's not quite the same vibe, I think, as
my brother had to take his daughters around, my nieces around this afternoon, and I could hear him on the phone talking to me. He goes, "How many places have we got to go to?"
Oh, so you should listen to our report tonight. There was an economist that worked out the number of steps per household and the lollies you get and how to do it very
return on investment.
You're crunching the numbers here. It's all very important business.
The Halloween spreadsheet.
No, I'll be prepared next year.
You have clients who could make a spreadsheet out of anything, I'm sure.
Yeah, we do.
Yeah, I'm sure. Thank you very much, Greg Baxter and Angela Vathulkas. Great to see you both. Thank you for coming as always.